Welcome back to another episode of In the Mirror. Today we're going to be talking about if guys and girls can be friends. Hello, I missed last week's podcast episode. I have a great reason. I was prepping for a return to streaming. I hadn't got a chance to properly record the podcast in the way that I wanted to, so I thought it would be best to cancel for last week and then just come back strong this week. Please don't hate me. Bear with me, please. Also, as you can all see, we are in a different setup today. Ever since resetting my stream to take place here, I have found it really challenging to move things back and forth. So I thought maybe for this episode, we just do it right here anyways. I think when I think about the idea of friendship, I often think about this question. I know it sounds really silly because what type of question is this? Let's just be quite honest with ourselves. Of course, guys and girls can be friends. It'd be silly if that wasn't the case. But the more I think about it and the more that I've lived my life, I think there are parts of this question that have made me naturally contemplate. Because you see, when I think about friendships in my life, there are a lot of women friendships for me. And people will say what they want. Some people will say that I'm ran through. Some people will say that he's a mama's boy. Other people will say he's emotionally in tune with himself. All of which probably potentially a little bit slightly true. When you're gravitated towards a kind of energy, for whatever reason it may be, I do think a lot of it has to do with your roots as a child. Like it all stems there, right? I used to never think about this question. I was like, what do you mean? Like my friends are girls and they're my friends. Like, surely I can have friendships with them. It is what it is. But I think this question gets a little bit more complicated over the course of time, and it has nothing to do with even me or that friend or whomever that friend would be. It just has to do with like life circumstance and how people view each other. Maybe this says something about gender dynamics that isn't talked about enough, but would we say the same thing if it was a male-female friendship that was new, or would we look at it and question it a little bit? Now let's take this friendship idea and apply it to people who were new friends, right? Like maybe just met, fairly new to each other. Keep in mind, the friendships in my life with the opposite gender happens to be with people that I've known for 10 plus years. So I think that's where then you start asking yourself, are these kind of relationships possible in this stage of your life? Like if you were to make a new friend, because I do think there's something to be said about like the length of time that you're friends with someone. Like there is no romantic desire. It is purely just friendship, like on a very platonic level, on a very like boundary strong level, right? But I think that gets a little bit more confusing when you are in a friendship with someone that you don't have that kind of sustainability with just yet. And that kind of fascinates me, right? Because even those friendships started out with not that substance either. So like how do you get from point A to point B, and then is it possible to do later on in your life? Because like in my example, in my case, a lot of those friendships from point A to point B where like you have a 10-year tenure is due to like in some ways forced connection. Like what do I mean by that? You're in the same class as someone. You see them at work. You're in a situation where you naturally are put together pretty much. You do the same extracurriculars, stuff like that. Like things that are designated to you not by choice when you are younger. So like, high school friends, college friends, stuff of that nature, elementary school friends, whatever the case may be. But almost like decisions made by not you, but the circumstances around you. And then in doing so, you just became friends. Now, let's turn that on its head and say you meet someone for the first time. You are now making a choice to be in a friendship later on in your life. Maybe like you're in your late 20s, right? Like you're not going to school, so you don't see people every single day. Like this is someone you saw at like a coffee shop and you approach them and you're like, hey, you sparked a conversation and you wanted to be friends with them, which I don't know if that'd be like the first invitation. It kind of feels like more like a date interaction, but you get my point, right? You have that moment. Then you start to ask yourself, and I'm sure more so she's probably asking herself if you're the guy approaching, or even vice versa, to be honest. What is he doing? Is he trying to hit on me? Is he like what makes him feel like, you know what I mean? Like the dynamic is interesting. It changes the dynamic. I feel like I realized this recently where I met someone that in large part, I would consider like a friend. But somewhere in between, I kind of get you get a little confused. Like I naturally got confused at what it was because boundaries weren't drawn and clear. When it's not clear boundaries and maybe there's a little bit of physical attraction, I think that makes it really difficult. So I think if we're talking about those dynamics, I think it gets really challenging because boundaries become more important with new relationships in general because it's not the same as when you had a relationship with someone for 10 years and you like have already established what this is. Like there's no question. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, of course, guys and girls can be friends. I think people draw that out of proportion. Like, for whatever reason, if a guy likes sports and a girl doesn't, they, they're not compatible. Or vice versa. If a girl likes Taylor Swift music, wow, I'm going down the hole of gender stereotypes right now. And the guy like listens to like punk rock or I don't know, Kendrick Lamar. Or actually better yet, Kanye West. They can't be friends. And I just don't think that's the case. I do think it is circumstantial. But more importantly is the question, are they able and willing to draw boundaries? Because I do think able is one thing, but then willing and like wanting to, like it has to be a choice to draw boundaries, or else it doesn't work. I mean, take this from someone who has a lot of female friends. I think that my female friends would respect me less if I didn't draw those boundaries. But I think on top of that, I think there's something to be said about like the emotional dynamic. Like you can't just like insert yourself in and draw a boundary and make it okay. Because if you have too much, if you have too much masculine energy, and you're coming across like you could hit on them anyways, I don't think it would work out either. So I think it's a funny there's funny play there. You have to like it has to do with whether or not you can mesh well naturally. If you can't mesh well naturally, it wouldn't make any sense to, right? There are three big questions that I think need to be answered in order for these kinds of friendships to work. Number one, are you physically attracted to each other? I know that's crazy, but I do think it's true. If you are physically attracted to each other, oh God, you're in dangerous territory. Because even if you determine what it is in this current state, if you have emotional connection down the line and you still find each other physically attractive, oh God, you might be doomed. You might be doomed. They might start thinking about a scenario where like How I Met Your Mother comes up and you're like, wait, maybe this will work, and then you're in the deep end, you know? Oh, and I guess the caveat to the first question is if you are physically attracted, there is something there that makes them decide it would never work. Like as more than friends. For example, let's say one person wants kids, the other person doesn't want kids. At the end of the day, it wouldn't make any sense for that to ever pan out because it would go against what both parties want. And I think generally speaking, people aren't willing to ruin friendships over something like that. Like those are the times where asking what if isn't worth it. You know, as a natural what if asker and always acting on what ifs, there are moments where what ifs are not worth acting on, and that is one of them. That's not to say that they can't change over time, and that's the crazy part because people are fluid in 2025. You never know what people's desires look like. Like things will change, you know. But I do think it establishes a healthy boundary, right? But really, the big one over anything else, over any desire, over any like physical attraction, is literally the ability to say, this friendship means more to me than having a romantic relationship with this person. And so I think the truth is women and male friendships that are genuine, not like, oh, we're friends and like we don't know what it is really. No, like genuine male and women friendships are probably the strongest relationships. Whether it's big sister, big brother, or like whatever that dynamic is, it probably establishes a really healthy boundary that they know that they still need this friend on an emotional level, like rooted in not romance, right? Not in attraction, rooted in pure like genuine like heart to heart. And I think there's something to be said about friendships like that because I do think that sometimes like there are friendships in your life that are convenient. I think a lot of times people have friendships that are convenient. I mean, just take a look at like people who are like, no offense, but like people in sororities or fraternities. And a lot of the times, not to say that they aren't really friends, but forced connection, right? Like, how much do you actually connect with this person? Are you willing to like hear out their life? You know, Are you willing to hear out how they think? Like, at what extent are you willing to not judge them? I do think there's something to be said about like convenient friendships versus friendships by choice. I will say my friendships that exist today are now all by choice. So, what do I mean by that? I don't think I have a lot of friends, but I do have a strong handful of friends that I do really think are my friends. Like, I never question them. I don't need to hang out with them 24/7. In fact, I hang out with my closest friends like never. Not to say never, but like maybe once a couple months because we're all busy right now in our current stage of our life, and I don't take any ill will because I understand. Um, I think the ability to have compassion for your friends and not feel like you need to have them around all the time, but know that you have something deep rooted and meaningful is great. And that's not to say that those friendships can't exist where you see them every day, but I do think when you see your friends every single day, you have to ask yourself, is this out of convenience? Like, are y'all rooming together and then you became friends? Not to say that those friendships aren't as strong. It's just like, what does that friendship look like if y'all weren't living together? You know, those are the questions I feel like I ask. I know my friendships in the past, like a lot of them had to do with the circumstances I was around. Like, if I was in college, like I had friends that I went to college with, and those would be the friends that I message. But let's say now in the aftermath, right? Like I work a job, I don't go to school, like I do my own thing. Like which are the friends that check up on me? Which are the friends that still keep in touch? Which friendships still establish some form of relationship dynamic with me? Which are the ones who take the time to catch up when they're super busy, right? And more often than not, I've seen that out of my friends that in my case, are my friends that I've established long relationships with that were initially like convenient friendships because of like social dynamics that have then shaped into because of like experience between the friendship. Like we just have gone through so much together that they have naturally become people that like you can go to and count on, right? But then there are also friendships. I have a couple friendships that I feel like were kind of like choice designated, where, yeah, a little bit circumstantial, but mostly like by choice because of their role. Like I do think I have like some friends that I would be like, oh, like that's my big sister. And I think the funny part in all this is my friendships with my guy friends have naturally kind of dwindled out, and maybe it has something to do with like emotional depth. Maybe it has something to do with that. I'm like an emotionally in tune person. Like I like to talk about like big emotions and stuff like that. Whereas I don't think all guys do. I think a lot of guys are like more fascinated with talking about the day to day. Like let's talk about sports, let's talk about life, let's talk about business. And I love my friends that are like that too. I have a lot of guy friends that I appreciate and talk to. But I definitely think it's a different relationship dynamic because I don't think we have established that like heart to heart. Now, that's not to say that you don't get that over time and you don't get that in the stupid shit. Like, I think one of the fun parts about guy friendships for me is that doesn't happen then. It just happens naturally. Like, if something were to happen and like, like it's the no without being said. Cause like, I don't know, guys are like quiet about their emotions. So like, sometimes it is nice to not talk about them and then establish a friendship with someone where they like understand what you're going through and they're like, oh, let's go watch a movie. I think guys are good distraction friends. Like if you need a friend and you're going through a hard time, let's say you're going through a heartbreak, aka me recently, and your guy friends see it in your face. They're like, oh God, he's going through and you know it. But they don't want to talk about it because they don't know what the fuck they're gonna say. They know you're so emotionally in tune with yourself, like hearing you talk is gonna feel like that you're bitching. So he's gonna be like, "Hey, you want to go watch a movie?" You really know what he means by that. Is like, oh, let's still make your night a good night. So then we'll go watch like Weapons or something. I don't know if y'all have seen that horror movie that's been really great recently, but that's like I think that's the great part of like guy friends. Like sometimes you don't want to talk about it, and it is nice to have a guy friend to do that with. But again, I don't think that's the case for all people in general, and I think this is where like it will say a lot with guys who are naturally friends with girls and girls that are naturally friends with guys. I do sometimes wonder though if I was in a relationship because I question this a lot. Like I think about this all the time. One of my biggest fears is whether or not in my future because there was a point in my life where I thought it was necessary to throw my friends away, which happened to be a lot of them being girls, because my partner was self-conscious about my relationship with some of the girls. And in some ways, you're like, I get it because you don't want to disappoint, not even disappoint, like make your partner feel some kind of way. But then the other end of the stick is like, bro, these are my friends. Like, would you say this if these were guy friends? Like that. I genuinely asked that. Like, would you say that if these people were guys? Because if not, then I'm a little bit frustrated because I'm not attracted to these women. They're my friends, right? And so I start to ask myself sometimes whether or not I can have or be with someone who can respect that and understand those circumstances. Obviously, like the easy way to define all this is like, you have your partner meet your friends, like pretty simple, right? But I do think it's a conversation where like maybe some people will be turned off to the idea just by hearing that you're friends with the opposite gender. Like I've had it happen a lot actually. I think so many people go like, "Oh, most of your friends are girls," but then they meet me, and then they see my friends, and then they see the relationship dynamic, and they're like, "Oh, like I get it. I get why you are the way you are." Um, I don't think I'd be the person that I am without my like I think the reason that this is not me patting myself on the back, but the reason I make for a partner that is understanding and compassionate and patient, like all the things that I think a lot of women would want, is because I have friendships with girls and am able to understand some of the needs that I think people yearn for. Because I hear it all the time from my friends that are girls. Like they have taught me how to be a better man, respectfully. But I do question whether or not it makes it really hard for people. I mean, it's really a circumstance, or you have to see the person, right? But I get it. I get how that can be difficult. I mean, I've had people get like, is like jealousy the natural course? Like, does jealousy speak more about the individual or the people around them? And I think it can go both ways, right? Like, yeah, some people are just naturally jealous or envious, or like they could see, like, let's say they're a girl and they see another pretty girl, like they naturally are a little jealous, right? Which maybe speaks more about themselves. But then there are circumstances where, like, yeah, they'll get jealous because of a physical, like, they'll see something that makes them go, oh, like, now they have a reason to be jealous because of I guess, not a clear indication of boundaries. Like, for example, I will never be touchy with my friends that are girls. I don't care if I'm single. I still don't think I'm touchy with them. I think that's a dangerous game you're playing if you are touchy with your girlfriends. Like, no. Like, at most, you're giving them a hug when they leave. That's it. And you ain't even doing that. You're dapping them up. No, like I think physical line needs to be drawn for sure. Like that has to be probably the most like important boundary. But um, beyond that, I do think I don't even know if I have the answer to it, but I do think it becomes really difficult. And if anyone has any tips or tricks or knows how to navigate that, let me know. If we're talking about romance, I do need a girl who's able to understand and empathize with that. So sometimes sometimes in my mind, I'm like, oh, I need a girl who is friends with guys as well. And people ask, well, wouldn't you be jealous? Would you like question guys' intention? Would you do that? I'm like, no, I mean, I willing to trust until trust is broken, but that is not everyone. I think some people would say no. And I guess this is more of like a statement on life, but I do think people make a lot of stuff black and white when they really should be like evaluating the circumstance. Because at the end of the day, I do think guys and girls can be friends. That's like the easiest question to answer. This is why this podcast this week is going to be so short, is because yes, the answer is yes. Of course, they can be friends. But to what extent and what boundaries are drawn is the big question. I think if you want to have a healthy, strong, meaningful relationship with someone, be friends with people of the opposite gender. It'd probably be so beneficial to you in your life. You probably understand the perspective on that end so much more. You're not more. It forces you to not be closed-minded to things that you probably would be closed-minded about just because you are a guy or a girl. So I think a lot of people would benefit from having a friendship with someone of the opposite gender. But do so with healthy boundaries. Do not establish relationships with lust. Do not break boundaries that would make things confusing. And really understand what you're getting yourself into. Because if you don't, you're going to make it really hard for yourself and for the people around you. To round it off, I will say, as someone who has a lot of friends that are girls, I think the biggest thing that you can continue to do, whether you're the guy or the girl, is just be honest and genuine and real. I think the more you try to mask, the more things get confusing. The more pure and honest you are, and I think this is true in every friendship. I don't even think this is a woman men thing. It really is just like, just be honest. I think honesty goes a long way, and it establishes relationship dynamics much easier than not. If you start off with any relationship dynamic and you're lying or you're mischievous or whatever the case may be, people are already naturally going to question you, whether that is in a romantic level or on a friendship level. Like, don't make it confusing to them either. So that's my cup of tea for the day. I know it's a shorter podcast. Leave a like, subscribe, do all the things. Comment, please. This podcast needs more engagement. Okay. And I'll catch you all next week. I promise I'll get better about getting these in here, yeah? But you can also catch me on twitch.tv/Skyen, where we stream every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 8 p.m. EST. I'm running it back. I'm excited. Podcast, still going on, though, in the meantime. All right, y'all. Take it easy. Enjoy your nights, and I'll see you next time. Peace.